Yeah, so how I've started applying permaculture to my life and how that relates to symbiotic relationships. And so does everybody know what symbiotic relationships are? Okay, I've got a few notes. Simply put, it's mutually beneficial relationships. So an example would be you and your dog. Your dog makes you happy. He makes you feel loved. You feed him, you take him for walks. He lives. There's a dog right here, great example. Another one would be companion planting. You know, you plant your basil with your tomatoes and they grow better together. And so permaculture, I came into my life about 2 years ago. I didn't know what it was, and I was part of this group called the Brunswick Station, and it was a community group that we had this old warehouse that some friends of mine purchased, and they started refurbishing it just kind of slowly, you know, not traditional. And so we started hanging out there and having potlucks and talking about community and about food and how food affects our lives and where it comes from and all kinds of things like that. And it really changed my life being part of that group. And so I'm sorry, I'm really nervous. Anyway, so permaculture came into my life and I thought it was really interesting. And the principles of permaculture are care for the earth, care for the people, and fair share. And Brunswick Station was really all about that. We didn't know what permaculture was at first, but that was how we were living. We were coming together, we were caring for each other, we were just friends, we didn't know each other before, we weren't family, we weren't, you know, there wasn't a real reason for us to be caring for each other, but we were coming together and we were feeding each other, and, you know, if anybody had a problem, well, someone else will be there, and we would talk to them and try to help them solve that problem. And so this community started developing, and, you know, if we had extra, if somebody would come into the potluck and they didn't have any food, or they didn't have any money, well, we would feed them anyway because they were part of the community. So then I met Charles over here and he came in and we started talking about permaculture and we started learning about these ethics. And so from there, I started exploring that a lot more, and permaculture is often associated with gardening and growing your own food and bringing food back to the community and growing food in the cities. And so I started looking more into that, and this past year I decided that I wanted to do more traveling, and so I went and I traveled to Costa Rica and I took a 3-week course on permaculture, and I lived on a permaculture farm. And there I really started to see just how everything can work together in nature, and the more that you nurture those relationships, that everything works together, the less work you actually have to do, and the more you have time to enjoy your life. You can you can be happier if you're not constantly running in the rat race and trying to figure out, oh, how can I do everything myself? We can all work together, and when I say we, I mean people, and I mean nature, and I mean communities and businesses. And it's also about cooperation instead of competition. Because if you're doing things that you really care about, then you should want other people to do it too. If a business, as an example, I have a friend who has a yoga business, and sometimes people will say to her, oh, well, this other yoga business, they're gonna get all your clients, or things like that. But she's always saying, no, it's great, like, go there, go to that other yoga studio, like that's awesome, because she wants to see that benefiting more people. And so when you do that, when you share information, you share your resources, then more of what you care about can come into being. And yeah. And so another point about in permaculture is seeing solutions, not problems, which is huge in finding joy in your life, because it's so easy to look around and see all of the things that need fixing. But if you can, a great example would be, I have problems with slugs in my garden. Well, you don't have a slug problem, you have a duck deficiency, so that would be your solution. And that can be applied to lots of things in life. And so at this point, I kind of want to get you guys involved in the conversation. So does anybody have an example of something like this in their own life?
Anybody? An example of what?
Of seeing solutions instead of problems.
Seeing solutions in the problem.
Hi. So I had still have, I consider it a challenge, not as much of a problem. But for me, the challenge I've been living 2 years in Comme Village on a big property, and I still don't have any running water. I've dug 4 water wells, and it's all very high saline content, so it would cost a lot of money just to get rid of the salt and water and render it potable. So instead of seeing that as a problem, I needed to find a solution to it, because the house is built, I need to live there, I'm paying the bills. So then I started exploring other ways to harvest water, and now I'm setting myself up with a fairly big rainwater collection system, and that is just helping me be more resilient as well. So if the water is contaminated, if the water well is contaminated, I don't have to deal with that problem anymore. I'm independent from the water wells. I have rainwater, and I can store the water, and I can survive that way. So this challenge, this problem that I was presented with, made me more resilient, made me look at other ways to find solutions to address this challenge. And so that's one way. I guess that's one challenge that I switched over and created a positive way from it.
That's a great example. Thank you, Charles. All right, so another point that I would like to talk about is something that Charles just brought up, is becoming more self-reliant. And that's another principle in permaculture. I think the more that we're able to apply these things where, we can create our own food, we can create our own energy. Once we have these things set up, the stress kind of falls away because we're taken care of then. And I think that's really important. And I see more and more of that happening. Even people here, I know a lot of people here doing these kinds of things. And bringing food production back to the cities. That's something that I've been focusing a lot on. I've been doing some urban farming. I've been growing, microgreens with a friend of mine in town, and growing mushrooms as well. The past couple of weeks I've been running my friend's mushroom business, and it's been really interesting to see just the community coming together and being interested in that, and you know, people wanting to learn how to grow these things. Yeah, and there's just something that feels really good about eating what's growing in your backyard. You know, a great example is my niece was over the other day, and you know, I'm sure many of you know, if you have children, it's not always easy to get them to eat their vegetables or the healthy food. But we were walking around in the garden, and we were showing her that, hey, you can just pick this and eat it. And she actually picked a piece of kale, which, you know, is an acquired taste, especially for a child, and she was like, this is great, and you know, she thought it was delicious. And I think it really was just because she got to pick it out of the ground. You know, it was really amazing to her that she could just grab that and eat it. And so I think the more that we can do that, you know, regardless of where we live, you know, you don't have to be out in the country to be growing food. You can do that anywhere. You can start it in a pot or a raised bed, or even in your house during the winter, some things will grow. And so I think the more that we do that, the more we'll find ease and joy in our lives, because, you know, we'll have our basic needs right there, rather than having to go to the grocery store and where does that come from and what did it take for it to get here. You know, we can do it here. And yeah, so that's I think that's pretty much all I've got to say. Does anybody have any questions about permaculture or symbiotic relationships that I might be able to address? Pardon me? Sharing, okay, here we go. I'll just come closer.
It's really sharing your belief and your knowledge with everybody. It's
Yeah.
what you really mean by bio.
Yeah, exactly.
It's what you believe in, and you share with other people, and your knowledge of other things. That's what it means.
Yeah.
And that's the concept.
Yeah, pretty much. And I, you know, one thing that came to mind when Daniel asked me to do this talk, first I was just like, speak at the talking tree? I don't know if I'm ready for that, but one point that came up to me is to start even if you're not ready, you know, because you will become ready. It's like Corey was saying earlier, you fake it until you make it. I'm not typically a public speaker, so you know, this is this is a bit much for me, but you know, and that's how I've been approaching permaculture as well. I don't know everything, because you never will, but it's a constant learning, and you just start, and the more you start, the more things start flowing, and what you focus on, that's what you get more of. And that's what I've been experiencing in my life, and it's really great. So yeah.
All right.